welcome everyone. My name is Chris with Hillsborough County Public Library, and you're here for our underwater photography program. This program is part of our summer reading, Oceans of Possibilities. To find out more about what we have planned program-wise, activities, book lists, or reading challenges, you can go to hcplc.org/summer. All right. As you can see, I have someone with me here this evening. Renee, how are you?
Hi, good. Nice to be here.
Great.
Thank you for having me.
We're excited to have you here. Now, before Renee gets started, we have a few more things to share. Of course, this is the name of our program, Introduction to Underwater Photography. But also, we'd like to thank the Tampa-Hillsborough County Children's Library Foundation, who funded this program. So a big thank you to them for their generosity. We couldn't do this without you, so thank you so much. And also, we'd like to promote a book from our collection, Continue the Experience. It's called Underwater Photography, Art and Techniques, and this is by Nick Robertson-Brown. Now you can check this out as a physical book if you go to our catalog at hcplc.org/books. All right, now on to the program. I'd like to introduce Renee Capozzola. Now Renee is an award-winning underwater photographer who specializes in wide-angle and split-level images. Her work is an intriguing combination of artistic talent honed through oil painting during her youth and a professional background in biology. Renee believes that striking images help increase awareness of our fragile marine ecosystems and encourages others to help protect our oceans. Her images have appeared in leading online and print publications throughout the world and have won over 50 prestigious international accolades, including Underwater Photographer of the Year 2021 in the Underwater Photographer of the Year competition and the Female 50 Fathoms Award from the 2021 Ocean Photography Awards. Well, these awards are well deserved because I've seen some of her work and it's fascinating and fantastic. And now I am going to turn off my screen and I'm going to stop talking and hand things over to Renee. Renee, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Chris, for that wonderful introduction. As you mentioned, we're here to talk about underwater photography, which is my absolute favorite topic in the world. We don't have too much time today, so what I'm going to do is run through some of the, I think, most basic principles of photography that will help anybody who wants to get started with taking underwater pictures, and share some of the tips that I wish that I had known when I first was getting started myself. So as Chris mentioned, I work as an underwater professional photographer as well as a biology teacher. And I got interested in underwater photography back in 2004 when I started scuba diving. So for me, the diving came first and photography came second. And as soon as I started diving and seeing all of these beautiful things underwater, including the animals and the beautiful coral reefs, I wanted to take pictures of all of these things that I was seeing, and more importantly, I wanted to do something to help with the conservation of marine ecosystems. So today I work with a lot of dive and wildlife magazines, and I share my work to help increase public awareness of endangered animals as well as coral reefs. And I also speak at different locations around the world about my photography and have been featured by various magazines and newspapers about my work. So one of the particular, I should say, trademarks or styles of my work that I'm known for is called the split shot. These are images that are taken half in and half out of the water. So the camera is literally sitting with the lens half in and half out of the water at the same time. So these are single in-camera images. And one of my favorite techniques is to pair the subject matter or the animal, such as in this case, which is a shark, with something like a sunset, because I think that pretty much everybody likes a sunset, right? So if you pair the animal with something that's pleasing to the observer, it helps to grab their attention and hopefully get them more interested in protecting that animal or that ecosystem. So here you can see this is a black-tipped reef shark. This was taken in French Polynesia, which is known as the islands of Tahiti. Here's a similar shot of a stingray, and this was also taken in Tahiti as well. And this third picture is actually a green sea turtle, and I took this in Hawaii on the island of Maui. And here you can see lots and lots of sea turtles, and it's because they're strongly protected. But unfortunately, in other areas of the world, turtles are still listed as endangered animals. So I really like to work with turtles and use images of them to help promote their conservation. So hopefully they get added protections in other places in the world where they're not as plentiful. Okay, so when I first started taking pictures back in 2004, my pictures certainly did not start out looking like those three. In fact, they were awful. They were really, really bad. And so I'm going to hopefully share some tips with you if you're getting started to help you take some really great underwater shots. And I included this picture here because this was taken in very shallow water, so you don't need to be a diver. You can just be a snorkeler or a swimmer. And also it was taken with just natural or ambient light. So these are two critical things that really help you create just wonderful, beautiful pictures with just a basic compact camera, which is being in very shallow, clear water, having a nice subject, and having plentiful sunlight in order to take your shots. Okay, so before we get to some of the really basic or specific underwater techniques, I wanted to run through just three separate photography basic techniques, including aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. This is really helpful if you have a camera that you can shoot in manual mode or that you can adjust these three different settings. Most people will start out in like sort of program mode or auto mode, but then once you can start controlling these things, you can really take better pictures. So the first thing is called aperture, and this basically controls two things. It controls how much light is reaching the sensor of your camera, and also what's called the depth of field. It's measured in f numbers or f-stops, and essentially how it works is that larger holes that bring in more light to the camera have smaller numbers. So for example, f2.8 is a really large hole that lets in a lot of light to the sensor of the camera. On the other hand, if you have something like f20 or f22, that's going to be a high number with a really small hole with very little light reaching the sensor of your camera. Likewise, small apertures like f20, f22 provide a much greater depth of field than something like a large aperture of 2.8. And since we're talking about underwater photography here, for wide angle underwater shots, if you have a camera where you can adjust these settings, f8 is a really good place to start with a DSLR, and 5.6 for a compact camera. Okay, so shutter speed works together with aperture to essentially make your picture light or dark, and it's really the time element. It's simply the longer that the shutter is open, the more light that hits the camera, and the less time that the shutter is open, the less light that hits the camera. So for underwater photography, I would say that sort of the normal or average range for shutter speeds are between 1/60 and 1/250. Personally, I'm usually shooting around 1/160 or 1/200, but it really varies, and there are situations where you might want to have a really, really slow shutter speed. For example, maybe like 1/6 if you were doing kind of a motion blur kind of shot, but that would really be kind of the exception to the norm. Okay, and the third thing is going to be ISO, and I would advise someone to either adjust this last or to just set it somewhere between 100 and 400 and then just leave it there. In general, low ISOs result in a better quality image with less noise, which is how grainy like your picture looks. But sometimes you can't shoot with a lower ISO. You need to add more light to your picture, so you have to increase that ISO. But when you do that, you can risk more noise or graininess to your photos. If I were to go through my library of all of my photos, so thousands and thousands of images, I would say that at least 80% or more of my pictures are in the 200 to 400 range. So that's a really good place to start. Again, if this is something that you can adjust. Okay, so the most common question I get as an underwater photographer is, what kind of camera do you shoot with? So currently I'm shooting with the Canon R5, which is a full frame mirrorless camera. And I also have my Canon 5D Mark IV, which is a full frame DSLR. But again, I certainly didn't start out with one of these fancy cameras. I actually started out with a very simple, inexpensive, compact camera, point and shoot camera. I started with what's called the Sony CyberShot. I'll show you a picture of it in just a minute. I also recommend the GoPro and something like the Canon PowerShot series, because these cameras, which are a little bit more of a step up from the CyberShot or the GoPro, they allow you to shoot in manual mode. So there's still a compact camera, like you can't change lenses. They don't come with, you know, like a big fancy flash guns or anything like that, but they allow you to adjust your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO. And as an underwater photographer, eventually it becomes really important to be able to shoot in manual mode and adjust these 3 different settings. So this camera, which is a very inexpensive camera, allows you to do that. And lastly, I would say before you go with you know, a fancier high-end camera like a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, the first thing that I would actually invest in is either a video light or a strobe, which is basically a flash. Because when you shoot underwater, one of the biggest differences between underwater photography and land photography is that you have less light because the water absorbs so much of that light. So in order to kind of put the light back, you need either that video light or a flash, which is essentially artificial lighting. And once you restore that light back, your pictures look so much better. They look amazing because you get all the color back that you've lost with going underwater. So that's kind of the thing that I would invest in first. That would make much more difference than the type of camera that you're actually shooting with. Just to show you guys a few pictures. So the picture in the middle is the Sony CyberShot. And this is what I started out with many years ago, back in 2004. It looks pretty much the same as when I had it back then. And it does have an optical zoom, and what you do is you put it in a little housing like the picture on the right. You just got to make sure that you get the housing that matches your camera model. And it's got that nifty strap as well, you see there in yellow, so that you don't lose it. And this is something that should probably cost you, the camera and the housing together, maybe like $300 or so. And then on the left-hand side of the screen, you've got the very well-known and popular GoPro, which is very easy to use, and it's exceptionally well for video. So if you like to take videos, especially underwater videos, the GoPro is going to be a really good option. And then for Nikon, they do make a very similar camera to that Sony that you see there in the center. I believe it's called the Coolpix. So there is a Nikon option as well. And then people always ask, you know, what does it look like, what you shoot with? So this is my current setup when it's all put together, that has the underwater housing and the flash guns and all of the bells and whistles, so to speak. Okay, so here's just 4 basic tips that I wish I had known when I had started taking pictures myself. I think it would have made a huge difference in the quality of the shots that I was taking. So the first thing is, if you are using a compact camera in one of those plastic underwater housings that has either an optical zoom or the ability to zoom the lens in and out, go ahead and actually zoom your lens all the way out, which means that you have the widest angle of view possible. We're going to talk about this more in just a minute, but the reason for that is that the water itself, what we call the water column, it has a lot of particles suspended in it. Even when the water looks clear, these particles are there, and they make your pictures look dull and drab, and they also make your pictures look not sharp and not clear. So by getting as close as you can to the subject as opposed to zooming in with your camera is going to make a huge difference with the quality of your pictures. If your camera has what's called an underwater setting, I highly recommend to just use that setting. It's basically an auto setting that has a built-in red filter. We'll also talk about this a little bit more in just a minute, but red is actually the first color that you lose as soon as you go just half a meter underwater. So having this built-in red filter into your camera is going to make all of your pictures look a lot more warm and vibrant. And then if your camera does not have one of these underwater settings, you can use what's called a plastic red filter that you see in the picture there. So it just kind of pops on the sort of outside portion of the GoPro over the lens. And what it's doing is it's restoring all of that red color that you're losing in just the first couple feet of water. Finally, if you have a flash inside of your camera, I recommend turning that off. The reason for that is that the flash will light up all those little particles in the water that I was talking about, resulting in what we call backscatter that looks like snow in your picture. You definitely don't want that in your picture. Now, the exception to that would be if you were taking what we call a macro shot. So this would be something really tiny and small, like an eel or a shrimp, where you're a couple inches away and you're not going to get the effect of the backscatter, but you want to have that flash actually illuminate your subject. Now, the flash doesn't work on something that's even like, you know, a foot or two away. It just distributes or diffuses into the water, and instead it lights up the particles that are like between you and the subject. So that's why you don't want to use it unless you're really, really, really close, like a couple inches to the subject. Okay, so as an underwater photographer, the most important thing to understand is light and the behavior of light. It's really different taking pictures underwater compared to taking them on land. I actually started out as an underwater photographer. I did not transition from land photography into underwater photography. And I think that actually helped me because I didn't have to like take what I know and kind of, you know, change it and then apply it to how it, you know, is underwater. So the first thing to understand is that water, the density of water is much, much higher than air. It's about 800 times that of air. So for example, if you're taking a picture of a turtle and it's about 1 meter away, which is 3 feet underwater, that would be the same as being 800 meters away on land. That's half a mile or 2,400 feet, which is a huge difference. Like I was mentioning earlier as well, light and color are absorbed much, much more readily or easily in water. And so what happens as soon as light enters the water, it basically combines with those suspended particles, the, you know, like tiny planktons and little things that are in the water. And that's going to decrease the color and the clarity and the contrast and make your pictures look really dull and drab. And it's not just the depth, like how deep you are. So if you kind of dive down to 10 feet or something like that, it's also how far away you are. So if you were shooting a turtle and you were maybe like, let's say 5 feet down and 10 feet away from it, that would be a total of 10 plus 5 or 15 feet of distance that would be affecting the light and color that would be hitting the sensor of your camera. Okay, I really like this picture because it shows you the different colors of light. So if you take sunlight, which is white light or visible light, you can separate it into separate colors like the rainbow, right? So you've got red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple. And so what happens is red, which gives the most warmth and like vibrance to your pictures, you lose all red color as soon as you go half a meter underwater. So as soon as you go down to 3 feet, you have no more red. The next color that's lost is orange, and orange completely goes away at 10 to 15 feet. And then once you get down to 30 feet, which is more for a scuba diver, right, than a snorkeler, all you have left is green and blue. So whenever you look at these types of pictures where you don't have any artificial light, right, like a strobe or a video light, the pictures look like they're just all one color. They don't really have any vibrance or warmth to them, and they actually don't look very nice. So if you're taking pictures with a compact camera and you don't have a video light and you don't have strobes or flash guns, the smartest thing to do is to take pictures at the surface, right, like this, because when you're at the surface, you don't have to worry about losing all those colors, the red, the beautiful reds and the oranges and the yellows. You'll still have those. And you also have the most light at the surface as well. So as a snorkeler or a diver and you're a new photographer, really practice taking pictures first at the surface. The other thing about light is to think about you know, what time of day is going to be the best for underwater photographs. So when the sun is directly overhead, and of course it's not cloudy, that's going to be your best time of day. So usually between the hours of like 10 and 2 is going to give you the most light. The other thing to think about is how calm the water is. So when the water is really calm, like a swimming pool or a lake or a lagoon, that's going to give you the greatest light penetration. When you go out and it's wavy and choppy or windy, most of that light is actually going to reflect off of the surface, and it's not going to translate into the animal that's underwater or the reef that's underwater, and you're not going to get the same amount of clarity and sharpness to your picture. Okay, so I know that this is a lot of information, especially if you're someone who's new to this. So if you just remember one thing from this presentation, this would be the absolute most important thing to remember, which is in order to shoot clear pictures, you need to be very, very close to your subject. Okay, so this is ideally within an arm's length or less. You want to try to fill the frame with the subject matter, and instead of zooming, again, you want to get as close as possible, like, you know, physically close to the subject. And again, this is because the water column has all those little suspended particles. So the more that you reduce the distance between you and the subject, and you get rid of that water right between you and the subject, that's going to give you a clearer picture. And other than people asking me, you know, what kind of camera do you shoot with, the next most common question I get when people see my pictures is they say, why are your pictures so sharp? Why are they so clear? And they automatically assume it's the type of camera that I'm using, when it's actually not the type of camera. It's actually based on two things. So the first thing is going to be how close I am to the subject, so being very, very close. And the second thing is going to be the quality of light. So either I've got a nice, sunny, clear day where the sun is overhead and I've got nice, calm, clear water, or I'm using either a video light or a flash, right, to restore the loss of light. So those of you guys who eventually have cameras where you can change lenses, using a wide angle lens is going to be really helpful, because they allow you to not only focus really close, but they allow you to get more of the subject in the picture, right, without cutting off like the tail or the head or, you know, part of, you know, what you're trying to take a picture of. So next tip or pointer would be to always shoot upwards towards the surface as opposed to shooting downwards. So shooting at a downward angle is actually one of the most common faults of new underwater photographers. And they'll look at their pictures, you know, and not really understand, well, why, you know, why does this picture not really look good? And one of the problems is that when you shoot down, that's where there's less light. It's also not flattering to the subject to shoot down on it. And it's actually very, very common, because if you think about being a snorkeler and a swimmer, right, you're at the surface looking down. And when you have your camera right in front of you and you're adjusting, right, the camera, or you're looking at the LCD on the back of the camera, right, you have the camera pointing down. So it's really hard for people to kind of remember this one at first, but even if it seems awkward, you want to put that camera straight out in front of you and shoot either at eye level or shoot upwards. So kind of what it looks like is like the picture on the left is, it actually looks a lot deeper than I am. I'm probably about 5 feet there, but my friend who took the picture was deeper than me, and he was shooting upwards towards me, and then I'm shooting upwards towards the sharks where there's more light. The picture on the right was actually taken near the bottom, right, near the reef there. So I couldn't really shoot upwards, or I'd be actually sitting on the reef, which is not good for the reef. So I'm taking the picture at the eye level of the shark and getting the shark and kind of the reef behind it in my picture. And the other thing that's really important as an underwater photographer, whether you're a diver or a snorkeler, is to make sure that you have what we call good buoyancy skills. So what that means is that you can see how my fin tips are kind of up, right? They're not touching the reef. And that's really, really important, because if you're dragging your fins on the reef, or even standing on the reef, as sometimes you'll see snorkelers do when they want to adjust their mask, Not only is it not good for the reef, but you're actually like setting a bad example for other people who might not know that it's bad for the reef. So that's one thing that's really, really important. The other thing that's really helpful for getting good pictures is to really spend some time in the water with the subject matter first. So for example, if you're taking pictures of turtles or sharks or fish or whatever it is, you want to be patient and you want to be able to understand how that animal is going to react to you being in the water, especially with a camera. It usually doesn't work out very well if you swim after the animal, right? So if you swim after the turtle or you swim after the shark, the most likely result is that it's going to actually get scared and swim away from you. And then you're going to end up with what we call a butt shot, and it's not going to be a very good picture. So one of the, I think, sort of misunderstood components of good underwater photography is it's not just the photographer, it's not just the camera, but it's actually time in the water and patience and understanding the animals that you're photographing, and being aware of their behavior and how they react to you being in the water around them, and then being patient enough to get the shot. I think that's a really, really important tip to just be aware of. So a few more things. So if you have a camera where you can adjust the various settings, I have here what's called jump settings. So these are sort of like good starting settings that you can sort of dial in before you get in the water. And these can, like at least be a good place to start from. So you can see those listed there. And then the last thing that I have here is to always do a test shot first. This is so important. I cannot emphasize this more. But for example, make sure that your battery is charged. Is it charged? Do you have your memory card in the slot? Do you have space on the memory card, right? If you have a camera that has a lens cap, did you take the lens cap off, or is it still on? I can't tell you how many times I've been on a boat with another photographer that still has their lens cap on. And if they had taken a test shot first, then they wouldn't, have that problem. And everyone has done one of these things, and then once they make the mistake, they never do it again. So I've jumped in the water without a memory card, and I can tell you I've never done that again. So always do a test shot first. The other thing that I want to mention is, this is a very short presentation. It's a lot of information. So hopefully I've sparked your interest in underwater photography. And if this is something that you're interested in, I highly, highly recommend one of these books. So the first one on the left side or in the middle is called The Underwater Photographer by Martin Edge. Now this is an older edition. Of course, he has a newer one out, but this is the book that I actually used myself when I was just starting out. And I found this to be extremely helpful. And it's also for all levels of photographers. So if you're somebody who's never taken pictures before, or you're somebody who's actually quite experienced, you're going to find a lot of information and a lot of tips in this book. It's actually a very thick book. So when you bring it with you, it actually takes up some of your luggage weight, but it's really, really great. And I still actually can get tips out of this book to this day. The other one that you see there, which is called Underwater Photography Masterclass, this is by Alex Mustard. And this is an amazing book as well. I think that this one is a little bit more advanced. It already assumes that you have some basic knowledge in photography and diving. And it's actually, I think, kind of a little bit more suited to people who want to learn specific types of shots, like the split shot, or the sunburst shot, or macro versus wide angle, or motion blur, or things like that. But these things can be really, really helpful. You can also find lots of very helpful information online by just Googling the specific topic that you're looking for. So that's basically what I have for everyone tonight. And I think we still have some time for some questions and answers.
Yes, let me hop back on here.
All right.
All right. That was great. We do have that underwater photography masterclass book in our collection. So I just want to let our card holders out there know, if you want to check it out, you can. But yes, it's questions time. So let's see if we have any questions. Now you can submit in the question section on a tablet or phone, tap the question mark, and you can submit that way. So someone is asking, does anyone ever still use film for underwater photography? Have you heard of anybody doing that?
So the first pictures that I took were actually using film. Film is very difficult because you only get 36 exposures. you don't get any feedback, right, until you come up. I haven't seen anyone personally use it in the last 10 years, but I actually have seen land photographers that still use it because they want to get a certain type of effect, I think, in the dark room. But I have not seen, so the problem with underwater photography is that you have such a limited time. You have one tank of air, which on average is 45 minutes for people. You can't change your lens underwater. So, having the digital photography is so helpful because you get that immediate feedback if what you're doing is working or not. So I generally have not seen the film underwater, but only with land photographers.
Yeah, that makes sense though. You want to be able to not have to worry about the other things when you're way down there, I'm sure. Yeah. All right, let's see. Someone wants to know what type of photo editing software, if any, do you use?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And if I had more time, I would have gotten into that as well. So I think the two most common editing softwares that people use is Adobe Lightroom and Photoshop. Now I use Lightroom. I don't know how to use Photoshop. I've actually never used it before. And I find that I can do everything that I need to do on Lightroom. And the most common edits that I'll use is cropping, clarity, contrast, white balance, exposure, things like that. I find that to be very, very helpful. And I think, you can't substitute these softwares for a good picture. But today, like working as a professional photographer with magazines and things like that, you definitely have to have software to edit your photos to make it at the same level as what people are using professionally. So you need to have the good picture and you need to have the editing software.
Sure, that makes sense. All right, we have time for one more question. We have several here. Here's a good one. What is the most dangerous or scary place you've taken underwater photos, if there is one? Is there one?
So actually, the question that I usually get is, what's the scariest diving situation or animal, and are you afraid of sharks and that sort of thing? Right. And the thing that actually always comes to mind for me is actually, it has nothing to do with any of the animals, but was actually being left by a boat. So I was in Indonesia, and this was in 2008, and we surfaced from a dive. There was the dive guide plus 4 divers, including myself, and the boat was not there, and we were in a very remote location and had to actually swim to a deserted island to get rescued by a boat. So the scariest thing that I've ever encountered was not anything underwater in terms of an animal or another diver, but was actually a human error in getting left by the boat. So that was not good. And nowadays I actually dive with one of those little GPS devices that can locate you if the boat doesn't come.
I would say that's probably is the scariest. Oh my God. Well, we're glad that all worked out. So you're still here amongst us and making these wonderful photos. My goodness. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for questions. Renee, that was an amazing and great presentation. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your knowledge. I'm going to bring up our last slide here. All right, so if you want to contact the library directly, you can call 813-273-3652 or go online at hcplc.org/contact. Also on our website, you can see our summer landing page at hcplc.org/summer. You can share your library story, and you can also check our calendar of events. There's lots to do there, so please check out our website. And again, thank you so much, Renee. That was really great. Lots of wonderful information there. Yeah, and I hope everyone else had a great time. And have a great night, everybody. Yeah, have a great night. Talk to you soon.
Thank
you.